Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a list of your favorite things about young adult fantasy. This is part of an ongoing series that I've started comparing young adult fantasy to adult fantasy. I started by asking all of you your least favorite things about both age ranges. I already put those videos up, so I'll have a link down below if you want to see the juicy stuff, but now into the gushy stuff and ending on a positive with our favorite things. Jumping into it though, the first one says, fast pacing, romance, friendship dynamics, and plot twists. When it comes to pacing, I totally agree. I think young adult tends to be faster paced. They do tend to be a lot shorter too, which helps. I think that a couple books that come to mind, Skyward, A Curse So Dark and Lonely, I think both of those right from the start, you're intrigued and you're in it and then you go. While I didn't necessarily love An Ember in the Ashes, I do think that one was fast paced but very dark right away, so it kind of appealed to a slightly different taste. But either way, I would say adult tends to kind of take its time, which I'm not opposed to, but I do think that if you're just needing something that hooks you right away, young adult tends to do that fantastically. Ironically enough, in regards to the romance part of this answer, romance was listed as a con for both adult and young adult. I do think it was considered a con for different reasons. A lot of people with adult thought that it was overly sexualized, or the way that the women were treated in the relationship was weird, or that it's really underdeveloped, where it was almost the opposite for young adult. Most people said they felt like the romance took over the plot. So basically what I'm hearing is there's no pleasing us fantasy fans. I think there's validity to both of those claims, but I think it's a matter of preference here, because I do think that the romances in young adult, while they seem to be more often present to a greater degree in young adult than in adult, I think the plus side of that is that you often get better developed romances in young adult. Not always. I won't comment too much. I just praised Skyward for its fast pacing, but in Starsight, it was like, oh, that development we'd started, let's just push that off to the side. Poof, let's just move on. But I do think there's a lot of young adult where the romances, I think that they end up being really sweet or really well developed or really engaging, and you're like rooting for the characters to be together. And then friendships, I do think there's a lot of really sweet friendships in young adult. And then plot twists, I think that sometimes there's intense plot twists. I think young adult, instead of plot twist, I would say cliffhanger endings tend to be pretty common. Some people hate those, but I think if they're done really well, they can cause so much suspense and tension and really make you want to pick up the next one, so I'm kind of a fan of that personally. I spent a lot of time on that one comment. The next one says, they usually are lighter and more fun and easy to read, and I enjoy that sometimes. This sums up a lot of why I think a lot of people like young adult. I do think young adult, it's fantastic for I just want to read something that I can really enjoy, I can get through quick, and then I can read another one and I can get through it quick, and maybe it'll make me feel happy, or maybe it will be really powerful and impactful, but it doesn't take 800 to 1,000 pages to do it. This next one says, the book covers most of the time, they are beautiful. And I agree with that. I think there's the occasional blech. I would say for the most part, there are some pretty gorgeous covers. Strange the Dreamer. Oh my gosh. I think this next one's really interesting. It says usually the family dynamics are better because you're following less characters, and I think that can definitely be really true. I always say I think young adult's more character driven, and I think that this is part of that. This next one says it can feel cozy and easy to speed through, and I really like the use of that word cozy, because that's kind of how I feel about An Enchantment of Ravens, Sorcery of Thorns. I think those are such cute cozy reads that they're just kind of lovely. You can probably read them over the weekend and sip your tea or your coffee, or if you're like me, sip the ice carbonated water drinks. I drink those all the time. But I do agree. I think a lot of them can be cozy. I don't know. Is Malazan ever going to be considered cozy? Probably not. This next one says unique plot points. I very much appreciate this comment because I really agree. I have conversations with my husband all the time about how so many young adult books have such interesting plots, and I think that there's this misconception that a lot of young adult books are copy and paste, they're exactly the same, and I understand, I shouldn't say misconception, because I think it's a matter of how you perceive things, but I think a lot of times when we look at young adult, we look at the really, really popular things and we look at the trends. So you see Twilight and then you see a bunch of vampire books, or you see A Court of Thorns and Roses and then you see a bunch of fae books. But I think what it actually comes down to for a lot of us when we see these things is that we see these things happening so fast, whereas adult fantasy, I mean, it's kind of stagnant. We kind of sort of stay in like medieval Europe or just Europe. That's a lot of, like, not historical fiction wise, but inspiration. So you had Tolkien and then some form of sword and sorcery type books, the King Arthur legends. And I feel like between those things, that's where a lot of other books have gained their inspiration. And then the only big trend that I can think of that I have seen is in adult fantasy now with the success of the Song of Ice and Fire books and TV show. Now there's this push for grimdark. But overall, I feel like what's happened is that we just associate this specific thing with adult fantasy, not realizing that it's its own trend that just we haven't really gotten out of. Where young adult, we see the trends happening so fast, and then we're just like, oh, it's like all the same stuff. Well, yes, sometimes we find books that feel very similar. I actually think there's a lot of really unique creative ideas happening. This next one, I think, goes kind of perfectly with what I was just saying. It says, fun and less stressful, fast-paced, and more diverse. I love fantasy inspired by different cultures. So I find that when talking about young adult, it's really cool to see how many different books are coming out with different point of views. And I think when people think diverse, their first instinct, depending on their feelings and who they listen to and whatever, I think there's this idea that diverse just means like anti-white, when in actuality, diverse just means a more varied range of perspectives. And I think different life experiences are what is going to bring that. I think that this next answer is really, really sweet. It says there's a sense of innocence and feeling that the young can change the world for the better. I think that's lovely. I also think it's very true. Sometimes people look at young adult and then they're like, oh, it's too young. It's great for young people to see characters that they can relate to on something as simple as their age. I think it's really cool that younger readers can see that and be like, this is so cool. This character's like me. They're young. I can be awesome too. This comment says, the whimsy of it all, YA fantasy for sure has more fantastical storytelling. I think that's very true. One book that I just finished reading that I think fits that pretty well would be Spin the Dawn, which just felt like this whimsical, kind of like a fairy tale. And that one's definitely a lot of a love story as well, but I think it fits. This next person said that they don't read a lot of adult, but so far they feel like they can relate to more young adult protagonists. And I'm curious all of your thoughts on this. Do you tend to relate more to one over the other? I think it definitely, of course, depends on which books you're picking up. Like, oh my gosh, the amount that I relate to Kaladin and the Stormlight Archive and Vin, which they're kind of different people, but oh my gosh, there are discussions of like depression and like just there's so many things about those in adult that I'm like, I feel it so much. But I think there's this sense of relatability with young adult books because of the fact that the characters tend to not be as morally gray. I think it's a huge push in adult right now is morally gray characters. And as a result, I mean, I don't think I'm a terrible person, so I don't know how much I'm going to relate to someone like Jazal from First Law or Glokta or something. The only thing I can relate to is that in my head, like Glokta, I'm constantly really annoyed all the time. I'm almost wondering if I should do a part 2 and just really share the love here a lot because you guys have a lot of really great answers. I think I'm going to end it on this last one, which says the usually deeper point of views. I like the immediacy and intimacy of the characters' emotions. Totally agree with that. I think not always. I just freaked out about Kaladin from Stormlight Archive and Vin, who I personally felt very connected to. But I do think that so often, kind of going back to an earlier response, saying that you get to know people better in the story because there's usually not as big of a cast. And I think that plays a lot into this as well. Sometimes you have a single point of view, and that's less common in adult. Adult is so often about this big world and the intricacies of it all and the details of it all, where young adult, I find, tends to be more about the characters. Anyway, I had a lot of fun gushing about why I love and why a lot of you love young adult fantasy. I'm so excited to be able to do this for adult as well. Thanks so much for watching. If you are interested in the juicy negative stuff, I'll have those other videos linked down below. I am going to be continuing this series with some other videos that I'm very excited about. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.